Hey, welcome to Perspectives. Today I'm joined by Jonathan Thiede, and we are going to talk about something that is evolving and becoming something here at Orchard Hill, and that's our residency program. We've actually had residents in the past. We've had 3 different people join our team as ministry residents, meaning they were exploring the potential of being in vocational ministry and hopefully getting some training, some exposure here at Orchard Hill. And we are now wanting to launch a bigger commitment to having residents as part of our church. And so Jonathan, who leads our young adult ministry and is also right now serving as our point person for residency, is joining me today to talk about residency. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. When we were talking about this very early on, I was very excited about it because I do think it dovetails well with the young adult responsibilities, because if a residency exists to invest in young adults who want to be in ministry, that really should just be an evolution of really what's already going on. You know, partnering with young adults, maybe who are accountants or business people or lawyers. But this is more people who have a strong sense. Hey, maybe God's leading me to, like you said, full-time vocational ministry.
Yeah. So residency was part of your journey in that you went to college, got a degree in not ministry stuff, went to work, and then said, maybe I want to think about this ministry thing, applied to a residency. So tell us about that experience and how that shaped you.
Yeah, I would say that's the primary reason I'm so passionate about something like this, because it really loops into my story pretty well. I can still remember it every January. I sort of get flashbacks to January before I was graduating. I just had a strong sense that God was calling me into ministry. I was asking some tough questions. I had an accounting job lined up, but just deep down I kind of sense I'm not really sure this is what God has for me. And honestly, it's really tough out there for someone in that position, because you go to people at your own church and if there's really not a job available, it's like, well, where do you really go? And so the advice I got over and over again was, well, I guess go to seminary, right? But for someone who's coming out of school, sometimes that's not always the most palatable, right?
Sometimes it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
You're making a financial commitment, a 3-year commitment if you're going to do the MDiv, as opposed to maybe let me try this and then I haven't spent 3 years on it if it isn't what I want to do.
Yeah, and for an accounting student, the financial commitment was really big. I think it's really neat. One of the reasons this is so valuable to a resident, if someone were to be really watching us have this conversation, I think the value is what you're talking about, that practical experience, because no matter how confident you are that God is calling you to something, at the end of the day, it's subjective until you bring someone else into the equation. In the book of Galatians, even the Apostle Paul is so confident that the words he's been given is from God, and yet he still goes to Jerusalem and confirms that with other people, and that just really implicitly tells us something about the way God has gifted the church to be able to do that. And honestly, I think in my experience, this was 8 years ago now, I was really shocked that more churches weren't investing in this sort of thing, because seminaries are great, and yet I think there is a need, at least in our country, in our context, for churches to take a little bit more of a responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's benefit to churches
seminary
as well.
Education is changing radically right now, if it hasn't already, in that most traditional seminaries are really struggling financially to attract students to move there, live, do years of education. Right. And so the residency model even is really becoming part of a lot of people's seminary, where they'll go somewhere, do a residency, and do seminary simultaneously through an online course of study or whatever that is. Yeah. And so one of the things that I'm excited about with this is I think here at Orchard Hill, we'll have a chance to invest in people who can become leaders in the church all over the place, some hopefully here at Orchard Hill, some hopefully in other places. And I think, as Jonathan said, it's really a way to be trained in ministry simultaneously to the educational component. And so that is really something that I can see being great. So what what would a resident do? And it's a nice word, but how does that actually work in your mind? How did it work in your experience? How do you envision it working here at Orchard Hill?
Sure, I can start with how it worked in my experience. I did a residency program out of a church in the Cleveland area, and we sort of traveled around to get all church exposure. So I myself started in student ministry, did that for 4 months, went into more of college and did a little bit of counseling, and then ended up with some adult ministry. And that church's context, we didn't do anything with kids ministry. But the idea was, hey, if you feel called to pastoral ministry, you need to know, put your hands on a lot of different areas of the church. How we're going to do it a little bit differently is ours is going to be a little bit more focused. So someone comes in, they're not going to travel between rotations. They're for an entire year, they're going to be a student ministry resident or a kids ministry resident. And this is a helpful time to just go through all the different focuses. There's 6 different areas of focus. So there's adult ministry, student ministry, kids ministry, worship arts, tech, production, and communications. And from my perspective, it's interesting going to different campuses as I've been talking to students. I've been really impressed how many students are interested in those last two, the tech side and the communication side. Going into this, I think when you think of a ministry resident, where our eyes are on sort of just, there's a lot of different student ministry internship opportunities out there. At pretty much every church, they're looking to hire people on for a summer or even for an entire year. But what we have the opportunity to do with our team structure is to bring someone on who has a communication degree, and yet they feel a strong sense, hey, I want to do this in the church. And so from what I can see at other churches, that's pretty rare, like to have something this focused. And so I think that's why we're getting some of that attention from people who go by our banner and say, oh, wow, you have a communications focus. That's really neat. So those are the 6 different focuses, and that's sort of how it plays out. As far as what a resident actually does, we can break that down really into 2 categories. There's education, and then there's really on-the-job responsibilities. So each resident will have a ministry director. That's sort of the language we're going to use. And the ministry director is really their manager for the year, the person who's giving them the tasks, giving them the responsibilities. And that makes sense because myself as the residency director, I can give them a high-level approach when we're doing recruiting and we're interviewing. But at a certain point when they come on campus here, we need to get them with the ministry director. Hey, if you're a student ministry resident, the student ministry director is going to be giving you those tasks and responsibilities. And we have the benefit of working with residents to really see how they're gifted. And so it's not as if every single year there's going to be these really rigid things that are tasks for every single resident.
Right.
If a resident doesn't have any desire to teach, it doesn't really make any sense to do that. Maybe to give them some exposure to test those gifts for sure. But if they come in, they know that that's not their gifting, that allows flexibility to have that conversation. And then that second piece is education. So my vision is for a couple times a month to gather all the residents together. So just to give an example, if you're a student ministry resident, for the most part, you're going to be working with the student ministry staff. You're going to be working with middle school, high school, you're going to be at events, you're going to be at small groups. But to give this more of a sort of cohort sort of feel, I think it's important to do this alongside other residents. And so that they don't feel like they're sort of on an island. Okay, even within the student ministry team, no one can really relate to my experience as a resident. So a couple of times a month, we'll get together just as residents. Hopefully all 6 areas of residents will come together with me, and we'll do some sort of education. And that long term, I see really dovetailing well with what we were talking about earlier with that education piece. Of dreaming big, of how can we make this a really valuable experience? How can we add, for those who are aspiring to seminary, how can we add something like that on? But even in the short term, I think there's a lot of value for people who feel called to vocational ministry to ask really ministry-specific questions. What is it like to work in a ministry office versus...
What's it like to work in a church?
Yeah.
Do I like it? Am I good at it? All of those are good questions.
Yeah.
So one of the other elements that I'm excited about is, and part of why we're trying to do this with multiple residents, is the element of community for the residents as part of that. And so we have a house that's part of our property here that we're intending to renovate so that there would be two different sides, hopefully, so that there'd be a girl's side and a guy's side, where residents could live together and be part of the church, and that would be part of the provision from the church to work. And what else do you envision helping create the community? So you said, there's education, there's actual responsibilities, and I would say the third part is there's community that would be part of that, partly just being part of the church staff, but partly between the residents. What would you envision would help foster that besides just the living condition?
The first piece I would say is kind of something you already touched on, our church staff. We have a luxury of having a lot of people who are on the younger side, which is not really something a lot of churches do. We have people who, let me phrase it this way, one of the most impactful things about the residency program when I did it when I was 22 were that a lot of the staff were 27, 28. They were people who were residents 5 years ago, and now they worked at the church. And so I was seeing the full-on process. I was seeing, okay, this is a real thing, and it gave me a lot of courage. Maybe not at this church, there wasn't an opening or an opportunity, but it gave me courage of, okay, I'm being trained to do this, and after this residency is over, I could go somewhere and be a student ministry pastor. I could do this, Whereas before that, the idea of working in church ministry, it felt further away. It felt like, okay, maybe that'll be something I do once I've really gone to seminary. But I think seeing it in action, having that community of people 5-6 years ahead of you is really impactful on you. So there's that. And like I said earlier, I think it dovetails well with my role with the young adult ministry. That would be something I would look to get them involved. That's something I've already seen from our staff. We have a lot of student ministry staff who are on the younger end, in their 20s, and they're a part of our young adult ministry. And I make it a really concerted effort not to ask them to really serve with anything, because my heart for them is, man, I just want you to come, and I want you to feel fed and to not think of it as you're on the clock, you're at work. This is the time for you to be among your peers and to be just in a group yourself. And so that would be my vision for the residents as well. It might be different for the adult ministry specific resident. I'd probably be like, hey, why don't you help me? This would be sort of a hybrid of that. It is work, but at the same time, it's we should be being fed by the group that we're in, and so that's what I envision for it. And I think really the house is an extreme competitive advantage with these things. When I did my residency, I was able to stay at a lodging that the church had. And it made such a huge difference. It was in walking distance of the church. It just allowed me to not have the distractions of the outside world for a year and to really concentrate.
Yeah, not feel like you had to upfit an apartment and all of that. You could just show up with a bag of clothes and some stuff and say, I'm here and ready to go.
Yeah, but really I foresee the community among the residents, I think, will be the most impactful, because they, in the world that we're envisioning in these two different apartments, they're going to be spending a lot of time together, and they're going to have to learn, I guess, how to work with others on the fly, even when they're not, quote unquote, at work.
Right.
And so I think that's really valuable for being in ministry. And that would be one of the things, like going back to education, when I take the residents together, that's something we talk about, the fact that conflict does exist in ministry. Yeah. It's not something that is just outside the walls of the church.
Right.
And
So why should a church like Orchard Hill do this? Like, is there a benefit to the church, or are we just training people to all go somewhere else? Yeah. And if so, is that enough? That's one question. And then if somebody wants to do this, how do they become a part of it?
Yeah, well, that's your first question. Really, is the $1 million question for a church like ours, and frankly, it's a big reason why definitely a lot of smaller churches don't do it, but even bigger churches don't really invest in this as well, because there is that fear of, okay, we're going to be putting all this resource, all this investment, and then we won't see anything of it. I think a church like ours, and really every church, should weave something like this into what they do, because otherwise, you don't weave culture into the employment experience. And what I mean by that is there's something really great about posting a job online on the internet, but what you're going to find is that people who have ministry experience, maybe they're 25, 26, 27, 28, they've been a student ministry pastor in a church in Texas and they want to come here. There's a lot to learn. They need to learn Orchard Hill before they even start doing their job, and that can be difficult, and that can lead to a lot of difficult conversations. One of the things that was most surprising to me when I applied for the residency that I did, I was interviewing, the weekend I interviewed, I was interviewing with one guy who already had his MDiv, another person who was 30 years old. And in my mind, just how the world works, I'm thinking, well, I don't have a shot because these guys are just way more qualified. Surprisingly, I got the residency, and the two other guys alongside me were also in my shoes. We were 22, and I found out throughout the year, many pastors said to me, we actually go after people who don't have the experience, the people who are fresh out of college, because people who are, like I said, 25 through 30, they already have a lot of core convictions, and if those aren't shared with the church, that can be a really difficult process. And so, getting someone when they're 22, when they're fresh, when they're moldable, I think that's a really valuable experience. So that's one reason the church should partner. The second reason is that their ministry is very unique in that turnover can happen very quickly. In a lot of jobs, I think turnover is, or in a lot of industries, I think turnover is a little bit more predictable. But we in ministry always have the very legitimate reason of, hey, I feel like God is calling me this way. I feel like God is pulling me in this direction. And so a residency really equips us to be flexible with that. If we have a student ministry resident, I keep using student ministry as an example, but it's just a foil. If we have a student ministry resident and someone in our high school or middle school team feels like God is pulling them in a different direction, or out of student ministry entirely, maybe they want to try out something on tech or communications. It gives us flexibility to say, hey, we really like this resident, and to approach them about that.
Well, one of the national averages on student ministry longevity is 18 months, that the average person takes a job in student ministry in a church and in 18 months transitions out. So at Orchard Hill, we've been way better than that, and yet it still feels like we have a lot of turnover. And so your desire is to obviously have some people who would be able to step right into roles here or somewhere else. And I think that's important as a church to say we embrace this not just for Orchard Hill, although that would be a benefit, but also for the church on a whole, and believing that we have something here that if we can help people gain what is good about Orchard Hill and take that with them to other ministry, really is an impact to the kingdom that is worth replicating and investing in. And so there will be an investment as a church to not just start, but to continue this program over time that may not always look like it has a direct line. Sometimes it will. But to Jonathan's point, I think we believe it's worth it for the broader church, but also for Orchard Hill as well. So how does somebody who says, hey, I'm kind of interested, do this, and who would be the most likely candidate for it today?
Yeah, so in order to apply, simply go to orchardhillchurch.com/residency. All the information is there. There's a pretty substantial packet of just information and things that you should know before applying. I'd highly recommend reading through that. We'd rather you do that before you apply than having to have more difficult conversations down the road. But the application is just right down there at the bottom of the page. My email is just a click away on that page as well. If you have any questions about the residency, feel free to reach out. Once someone applies, the application goes directly to my email. I try to reach out within a week. I reach out, set up an initial phone interview just to get to know the person. Hey, well, that phone call is all about where is God? Where are you in this process that God is calling you? Is this something where you just woke up and applied, or is this something that's been on your heart and on your mind for a while now? We just want to get to know the person to see if this would be a good fit. If I feel good about them, we'll invite them to a sort of more serious second round interview of sorts. We would love to do all of them in our church office, just to be able to give them a tour, show them around.
Well, it's something about feeling sensing what a place is like, not just doing it through Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so basically go to the website, the process is all there.
Yeah.
So anybody, and I would assume the most likely people are people who are either already connected to Orchard Hill or are maybe one step removed. And what I mean by that is it's somebody who says, oh, I attend Orchard Hill and I have a nephew or a niece who this might be perfect for. They haven't, they live in Tennessee, so they've not had a connection with Orchard Hill. But because I do, I'd love to tell them about it. Those are probably our most likely people today. I think long term, we'd love to build this to a point where people would look at it and say, Orchard Hill has a great residency. You should go there and do part of your training at Orchard Hill, because we hope to provide that kind of value to people who are partaking in it. But those are the people that probably right now would be most likely.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right, so Jonathan, last question for you on this. What can't be gleaned from the website or this conversation so far that's important for somebody to know about the residency?
Oh, that's a good question. The thing that can't be gleaned from the website is, I think, something we already touched on, which is the community that you'll find here at the church. That is something. It's something that every church wants to be a part of their DNA, and yet I think the way that we're building this has both a short-term and a long-term effect on a resident. Short term, I think it's going to be a year that is very challenging, a year that is going to be very challenging in a lot of ways. And yet the reward will be, like I said, having the courage to say, okay, I think I could see myself doing this. It is one thing to feel like you're gifted in an area, and it's another thing to actually test that out. And so for some it's going to be a challenge, but for some it's going to be a great encouragement. But then I think there's a long-term communal aspect in that. As you said earlier, we're not only giving you the sense of community, but we're trying to implicitly show you how to build that, whether it be here or elsewhere.
Yeah, what I would say in part to that, certainly the community, which sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. We don't want to overpromise on that. I'm not saying you are. I think that's a hope, a legitimate hope.
Yeah.
I did what at the time was called an internship. Back when I was 20 years old was when I did it. Now we use resident, but the imprinting that I got from that church in terms of how to approach ministry, what ministry looks like, served me so well when I went to serve as a youth pastor while I was doing my seminary, served me when I became a lead pastor of a small church, and still serves me today. And so, if you're considering being a resident somewhere, look at the church that you're considering and say, does that church have the theology, the feel, the approach that I think I would like to emulate in some way? Because there will be an imprinting that is much bigger than what you can read or glean, that you will catch just from being around people who are invested in ministry, that will shape you if you go into ministry for literally decades. And so that's something that I don't think you can capture, is say, do the people who I'm going to be around, do they have joy in doing ministry? Do they have an impact that's obvious? Is there a similarness to how we view faith? And if so, then that's going to be a really great place. So, Jonathan, thanks for making the time today to talk about this. And again, if you're interested in being a resident, go to orchardhillchurch.com/residency.
Residency.
And it's there. If you're interested in just helping make this a reality, reach out to me here at the church in terms of funding, because that would certainly also be a great way to help invest in the next generation of leaders. And I would be happy to have a conversation with you about how you could partner with Orchard Hill in making this a reality as well. So thank you. Have a great day. And don't forget to check out all of the good content at Orchard Hill Church Plus and orchardhillchurch.com.